agreement is to make sure that one person is speaking at a time, because if there's more than one person speaking, then it's harder for the people on Zoom to hear.
Got it. Okay. And also it's been requested that if you're speaking in the room, at some point we'll have question and answer or responses to it. There may be feedback, there may be things you want to say. Not everybody in the room has the same ability to hear, even in the room, let alone online. So let's as much as possible project as best we can. We have seats right up front. We have two out back. We have a couch if you'd really like to share. We have so many options. But try to keep our voice level up so everyone can hear. And if for some reason you cannot hear, just please raise your hand or something and let us know. Okay. So now it gives me great pleasure. You may all know Daniel from different parts of Daniel's life. I don't know. Most of us probably see him behind keys most often and singing beautiful songs. And there's other parts to Daniel's life. And so one of the reasons this intrigued me, Daniel and I were able to have a conversation prior to tonight. But when I heard he was going away for 3 months, and that's not an everyday thing, that someone says, I'm going to be going away and I'm going to be quiet for a while. And so I was just curious, find out what happens in a process like that. And then as we were talking, learned more about Buddhism and just really invited Daniel to bring some of that journey and sharing it with us tonight. So help me welcome Daniel.
Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and participate in this talk tonight. And it's exciting. I'm excited when people are excited about meditation or curious about it. It means a lot to me. The more I've given to it, the more it has grown and rewarded me in dimensions that I didn't know existed. So I really want to start by thanking Mike for inviting me and the Spirit's leadership for inviting me to speak tonight, to everyone for supporting me while I was gone, supporting me in my absence from this community for 3 months. It means a lot. It's really necessary to have people, the community and the people who are close to me in my life, who are willing to support me for taking that time to do this work. So I thought we might begin with a sit together. Just do a little practice right off the get-go. If you like to, it's entirely optional, but it might give us a little context for what I'm going to share about. So you don't have to sit in any special funny way. Wherever you are is great. I've done a lot of chair and couch meditations, a lot of bed meditations, which I call meditation. And wherever you are, let's see if you can feel comfortable where you're sitting. Feel this new moment arriving, a little more stillness in the room. Notice the weight of the body in the chair, the feeling of contact with the chair, couch. Feeling the feet on the floor. Wherever the hands are resting. And we might open up our attention to the sounds that are happening right now. Sounds of the light and the heating, the traffic outside. Maybe hearing your neighbor breathe or shift in their chair. The sounds are happening all on their own. They arise, they persist, and they pass away. We can bring the attention back into the body. Maybe relaxing the face, the jaw, the neck. Feeling the details and the subtlety of the muscles letting go. Feeling the heartbeat, perhaps. Wherever the hands are resting. Maybe there's tingles or warmth or coolness. Like we've never noticed before, like we're experiencing for the first time. And I invite us to notice the body is breathing. Feel the sensations of the chest and belly expanding, contracting. Or maybe notice the air coming in and out of the nose or mouth. And we're always somewhere in the breath cycle. We're breathing in, we're breathing out. Just beginning to breathe in, at the end of breathing in. It's always changing. Like most humans, our minds are probably going a million miles an hour a lot of the time. Might be a lot of thoughts about the past or the future, thinking this is so great, or I don't know if I'm doing this right. This is really nice, this is really boring. So thoughts are happening. Sounds are happening. Body sensations, thoughts, emotions. Every new thing we notice is reminding us that a brand new moment is happening. A moment we've never been in before. We can practice staying close to this present moment. I'll ring the little bell just to close our session together. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Always a great pleasure to try and guide a meditation. So, a few things to kind of expand upon what we experienced together. It's possible some of us feel a little more calm than before. It's also possible some of us feel less calm than before. Both of those things happen sometimes. But in the long term, on average, and with practice, and if the conditions are right in the moment, the practice can lead to more calm and tranquility. We have minds that are trying to take care of us, and it's like there's lots of little parts, and they're concerned with our relationships, and they're concerned with what we did yesterday, what we have to do tomorrow. They're trying to figure out what's happening right now, trying to make a plan, trying to tweak things. And if we practice resting the attention in the present moment, especially on something that's pretty stable and grounding, like the feeling of the body or the breath coming in and out, the mind itself can start to understand there's more contentment to be found in the present moment than we realized. And it can get pretty profound. I've had experiences of, like, not just, oh, I'm more content, but I didn't realize this much contentment was possible. So one aim of practice is to be able to cultivate tranquility or stillness, a mind that's content to be here. And as the mind learns more and more, this moment is actually pretty good. The mind gets collected and unified. And this moment starts to kind of expand because we're closer to it. And we took a bit of a tour of the senses and of the mind. And the attention can go to any of these places. Buddhism talks about there being 6 sense doors, the 5 we're familiar with, and the mind is considered a sense. The ear comes in contact with sound, and we have hearing. The mind comes in contact with mental phenomena, and we have thinking, memories, emotions. So when the mind is more collected, wholehearted, a teacher of mine called it, it's like being present with your whole heart to something. There's a kind of intimacy with experience. There's a closeness of vibrancy. It's like you're really noticing the colors. You're really feeling the details of the sensations. So that's rewarding in its own right. That's a beautiful quality to develop. But it also means we're taking in more information. So like the simplest way to describe this practice is like, boy, it's confusing out here. What's going on? It's really hard being a human. Like, I don't know there's a lot. I'm gonna sit down and like try and look what is happening. So the stilling part of the practice is to kind of use this analogy. Shinzen Young, maybe a teacher. It's like if you have a microscope on a table, you're trying to look really closely at what's happening, but the table is shaking. First, you have to get the table to be a little more still. So that's one of the functions of this kind of stillness or tranquility practice. And then once there's some unification, we can start to notice things we hadn't seen before. And in this tradition, those are called insight. There's another word some folks may have heard of called vipassana, which is often translated as insight, or to see into, to see through. So a lot of these insights can just be psychological, just understanding what's happening in this mind in a way that we didn't see before. Like I'm sitting in meditation and I keep noticing, wow, the mind is really caught up with what that person thinks of me. Like I keep going back to wondering what they're thinking of me. This happens again and again. And then eventually I notice, oh, there's a lot of like stress associated with that. I worry about them, and then my body feels tighter. I see this correlation between two of these kind of aliens, these sense stores that are happening at the same time, the thinking and the body. And this can be conscious, but the really deep kind of learning happens almost pre-verbally or below the kind of decision making. So it's like the mind itself understands, because it's seen it time and time again, boy, I could worry about that person and their opinion, but that doesn't get me anywhere, so I can just let go. So there's this kind of dropping back, spaciousness, less identification with the content of the thoughts, the problems, and more clear seeing. This is a pattern that's arising. There's some mental energy. It's having this ripple on the body. And psychology is pretty complicated. You've probably all noticed our minds are wild, diverse places. So anything's fair game. The practice is as big as life. So there's psychological insights, and I mentioned this kind of dropping back, letting go, making space. And the more we get practiced at that, we start to be able to see some of the more impersonal insights. And these are the ones that the Buddha talked about that he describes as leading to the end of suffering. It's a big claim. Well, one of the biggest ones is everything is changing all the time. There's a story of someone asking Suzuki Roshi, who was a well-known Zen teacher, I believe in California. Roshi, I've been coming to your talks for years. I still don't get it. Can you boil it down for me? Can you condense Buddhism into a nutshell? And Roshi apparently said, everything changes. That's probably not like that shocking to anyone. What's shocking is the depth. There's ways in which it's really easy. We habitually try to ignore that. We think this building will last forever. I had a dream on retreat that I died. Sorry. I had a dream a couple weeks from the end, like 11 weeks into meditating all day. Your dreams get pretty vivid. I had a dream that I died, and I woke up like crying. I was going through a lot of grief, just like the human conditionedness of it was really hitting me. My mom's gonna die, sister's gonna die. So there were a couple of days where that grief was coming and going. And after it had metabolized a bit, kind of got back to sort of practice I had been doing. And I noticed the mind, this like shift where it was like, okay, whew, we're done with that. That's over. Back to how things were. I'm going to live forever. My mom's definitely going to live forever. She's not going anywhere. So there's a way in which seeing the impermanence on the small level helps build the understanding to the parts of the mind that aren't totally convinced that things are actually impermanent. Impermanence has really big implications. Another thing you notice while meditating is you like some things and you don't like other things. The Pali word for this, P-A-L-I, is the language that Buddha probably spoke. It's the language that the earliest texts are recorded in. It was actually an oral tradition. They were memorized for hundreds of years, and there's like stacks of them. Quite amazing. So the Pali word for this is Vedana. It doesn't have a great English translation, maybe like hedonic tone or something kind of awkward like that. But it means this quality that all sense impressions, anything we come in contact to at one of those 6 sense doors, has this quality of being pleasant or unpleasant or kind of neutral or somewhere close to the middle. And we have really natural responses to this. We want the pleasant, we don't want the unpleasant. So what's wrong with that? Impermanence. We don't have a choice always. We can't control what's around us. So there's a sense in which this practice is helping us transcend the conditions that are around us. Now, there's a kind of obvious danger here, which is like, okay, so you just don't care what happens. That's a kind of spiritual bypassing, which I think is probably a trap in any spiritual tradition. But what I found is that having the ability to be less affected by liking and not liking, pleasant and unpleasant, transcending that, helps me be more resourced and able to engage with what's happening in my life, what's happening in the world. And it's also a doorway to greater compassion, because the heart is not so tied up with me and poor me and what's happening. I mean, don't get me wrong, I get that way, I'm not, but there's been a movement towards less preoccupation. I'm making no grand claims, like however slight is good, There's been a movement towards less preoccupation with poor me, to being more resonant with the suffering that happens around me. So this transcendence motivates and assists the engaging in the world. And I think it goes both ways too. So Vedana, liking, not liking, impermanence. Not self is a kind of famously weird one. I don't know if I'll do a good job getting it across, because it's a, it's a kind of, I've been able to see when it feels like the sense of self is stronger and when it feels like the sense of self is less strong. But I wouldn't say I've had the deep insight for myself of like, oh, wow, there's really no self there. A lot of the teaching, it's like, some amount of it I've experienced, and I have really confirmed faith. Like, yeah, I've seen this for myself. This really bears out. And then other teachings, it's like, okay, this is the received wisdom. I'm still in the process of checking that out for myself. So those ones I have to caveat with this, like, I'm not telling you from my direct experience. I'm telling you what comes from the tradition, what I have been working with seeing. The full understanding of there is no single, unchanging, permanent thing in my experience called self. Supposedly, the last vestige of this doesn't really evaporate until the final stage of enlightenment. So maybe don't worry about it. Yeah. And then the last, these are called the 3 characteristics, universal characteristics: impermanence, not self. And I'll just say the Pali word dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. A lot of these Pali words are nice to know because the English translations bring in other definitions or don't get the whole picture. So the most common translation of dukkha is suffering. And a lot of it is, but that's a little grandiose for a lot of our experience. I'm not like suffering right now. So other translations of this are something like stress, unsatisfactoriness, unreliability. And this is also a function of impermanence. When we have things that are unpleasant, we don't want them. And starting to notice this is really powerful. It's like, I mean, it's happening every moment. So, I mean, for me, the first time I started paying attention to it, I was kind of blown away at like just how prevalent this trying to get away from things is that I don't like. So we can't control, things happen to us that we don't like. So there's an unsatisfactoriness about that, or a suffering when it's really strong. And things that we do like, our habitual tendency is to try and hold on to them, to try and make sure that they're not going anywhere. So this takes us out of our actual, like, in the moment experience because we're concerned about the future. And then inevitably all things pass away. And so there's unsatisfactoriness when that happens. So I ended up getting into more of the kind of theory here, but I had a good time. I thought it was interesting. I thought what I might do next in my 3 months, so it's been a little over 3 months since I've been home. Been really lovely catching up with friends and family and being back here at Spiritus. And one of the things I've noticed about what people tend to ask, there's kind of some frequently asked questions. So I thought I might just kind of do some of those right now, if any of them are like burning for you, and then maybe you'll answer some things. So people ask, were you really silent for 3 months? Does anyone want to hear it? This is a frequently asked question. Pretty much, yeah. There are a few little exceptions. So about every third day, I would have an opportunity to sit with one of the teachers for 15 or 20 minutes to have a one-on-one private conversation about what was happening in my practice, questions I might have, get some encouragement, clarification, empathy. Those are really valuable. And the expertise of my teachers that I've had the fortune to meet and work with is, I have really very deep respect for them. Most of them have been practicing for at least a couple decades. Some of the older teachers have been teaching for 30, 40, 50 years, practice in Asia, practice in monasteries, scores of long retreats like the one I just sat, they really know their stuff. And another big treat was every night at 7:30, one of them would give a talk for 45 or 60 minutes. So that's kind of a, okay, I made it. I'm at the Dharma talk. Really enjoyable. Your mind is so thirsty for concepts, and encouragement. The Dharma talks really got me through, a lot of days. A lot of days. So I got to hear them speak sometimes. And then sometimes in the mornings, they would offer some guided meditation similar to what I offered here, or they would be answer to some written questions. You could write some questions and they would answer them once in a while. So other than that, silent all day long. No music, no internet. I didn't bring any books. I think some people may have bought a book of poetry or something, but the general recommendation is to not do any reading. I did have a journal to kind of keep me from going totally mad and write down some things, take notes on a Dharma talk, something like that. And there were a few other things that helped with the kind of safety of the container. So for example, there was a red phone in the office that 24/7 was connected to someone on staff there who was on retreat support, people who were experienced, and you could pick up the phone, would ring one of them. If you needed someone to talk to sit with you, to drive you to the, some people have to go to the doctor or something. It's 3 months, a lot can happen. Yeah, so they were there. I didn't end up calling them, but there were several times when I came close to. I was towards the limit of something difficult happening. And it was very helpful and reassuring to know that they were there. Yeah, so this retreat center. Oh, question?
Yeah, outside, inside, running, walking, swimming, sitting.
Yeah.
Well, a little mix of all of those things, or what was the climate where you was? Comfortable to be outside for periods of time?
Yeah, well, landed in December in Massachusetts. So it did get cold towards the end. Outside, inside, yes. I think you said running, climbing.
Oh, running, well, yeah. Active or sitting or?
Yeah, walking meditation is great. Yeah, I did a lot of walking meditation, and there's rooms all over the retreat center for walking, walk outside, sitting in various places. So there's a big Dharma hall. I don't know how to describe how big, but where everyone could gather, and usually did in the morning sit for the Dharma talk, and could all sit together. You can practice in your room, you can practice in bed, you can practice in the woods. So yeah, thank you. Dharma is a word with a lot of meanings, unfortunately. Yeah, Dharma means like it could refer to the Buddha's teachings, which maybe you specify the Buddha Dharma. It can refer to nature, just like the way things are. So it is an assertion that like impermanence is the way things are, impermanence is the Dharma. But it has that meaning as well. In this context, Dharma hall just means like hall where we practice Dharma and talk about it. So, oh wait, I'd like to keep going and we'll do more time for questions later. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
I do know it's quite all right. I do want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. I'm going to probably skip my whole spiritual biography part of this talk. We'll see. I'll do a brief version of it. So the center is called Insight Meditation Society. It's in Barre, Massachusetts, small town in central Massachusetts. It's been there since 1976. Was founded by some practitioners who are younger than I am now. They had already done, I'm not sure how long, but some years of practice in India and other places in Asia, and decided to start teaching and set up this center. They've been doing a 3-month retreat there every year since the mid-70s, with the exception of a few years, 2020, 2021. That itself is a tradition that dates back to the time of the Buddha, called the Rains Retreat. It was a rainy season in India. He suggested the monastics not walk around the countryside like usual because they would crush the crops. So instead, every year, just practice for 3 months. So that tradition has been going until today. Yeah, the building was very beautiful. Many plants, well, landscaped, and there was I had a room that was pretty small. I had a view of the forest out my window, which was very helpful. I called it Tree TV. Always something good on Tree TV. Trees get very interesting. Beautiful woods out back. You can take a hike. Beautiful backcountry roads out front. You can take a nice long walk. So it's a really lovely center. There were about, I think 85 or so people practicing there. A little over 50 of us were there the whole 3 months. The retreat is set up in 2 6-week sessions. So about 30 people did either the first half or the second half. There was a change of the teaching team switched over at halfway point as well. There were 6 teachers. Yeah, and there were people of all ages there. I mean, the youngest was, I think, early 20s. And there were folks, I don't know exactly how old they were, but 70s, maybe 80s. There were definitely some older folks there and everything in between. Folks from across the US, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Spain, France, Switzerland. A couple guys came from New Zealand. So that was pretty cool. Sometimes people ask about the schedule, if there was a schedule. There is a schedule. It's pretty much do sitting practice for 45 minutes, do walking practice for 45 minutes, sit, walk, lunch, sit, walk, sit, dinner. So kind of punctuated by the meals. It's a short period for some chores, some people do a little cleaning or chop some vegetables. I swept the floor on my dorm 84 days in a row, my part of the dorm. And then the Dharma talk at night. But the schedule is totally optional. One thing I appreciate about this tradition is it really encourages practitioners to discover for themselves what supports their practice best in terms of what helps the body be comfortable, managing energy levels, what locations and postures are best for practice, depending on all kinds of things. Okay, I'm going to try and leave at least 20 minutes, or maybe 30 minutes for Q&A. I always talk about more things later. I'll say like a very brief version of like how I came to be in this place where I felt like a natural thing to me to want to do. When I was young, I was raised in a Jewish, Reformed Jewish family. We weren't particularly religious. I did particularly loathe going to Hebrew school. I did not enjoy it. First time I kind of stopped to think about it, I was like, oh, I'm an atheist. That's what that is. It seemed very apparent to me. And reflecting on this recently, I feel like there was actually a good foundation for spiritual practice in that move, because I was essentially realizing that I didn't have to buy into dogma. I would rather see for myself. I didn't understand at the time I was buying into a subtler form of dogma. And over the years, my own exploration of just trying to be happy, trying to find things that work, just curiosity led me to meditation, to my first week-long retreat, which was in 2017, led me to some plant medicine experiences, psychedelic experiences, starting around 2019, which were also very transformative. And there came a time when I did a retreat in 2020 or 2021 at home, just on my own. And after a week of practice, I felt like, gee, that was good, but it kind of wasn't that much. I was just starting to really get settled. So that was the impetus to feel like maybe I was ready to start considering a longer retreat. In 2021, I sat for 3 weeks at IMS, the same center, and then this last fall for 3 months. So I'll say just a few words about my experience on the retreat itself, and then we'll open to questions. It was really long. I got very acquainted with myself, with my emotions. At one point for 3 weeks, I did what's called loving kindness practice. One way of doing that is repeating phrases that engender goodwill, like, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease. So I would just repeat those words for 30 or 45 minutes and then switch to a friend or a mentor. You're trying to just generate goodwill all day. I did that for a while. But the bulk of the retreat, my practice kept evolving, really. My understanding kept evolving. What I was seeing kept evolving. What I was going through kept changing. So, basically for me, a teacher told me once, continuity of mindfulness is the engine of retreat. It's a phrase that really stuck with me. So mindfulness is what we were practicing earlier, knowing what's happening while it's happening. And continuity is just refreshing that again and again, staying with it. When you lose it, coming back to it. So there can be a lot of doubt that comes up. Am I doing this right? Does this even work? Should I do it this way? Should I do it the other way? So that's a really good touchstone for me. Like, as long as I'm practicing continuity of mindfulness, somehow this is working. So there are many ways of doing that, just staying with the breath for an hour or something like that. You can count the breaths as they come in, maybe 1 to 10, starting again to be useful. You can stay with the body. You can make a mental note of what's happening, sitting, pulsing, heartbeat, hearing, impatience, just kind of pointing your mind gently towards what it's noticing. There's many ways to practice. So I experimented with quite a few and kind of found my way into more and more continuity. And then there's these storms that come up because as your system gets more settled, there's kind of a cycle that often happens for some people. Your system gets more settled, and then that allows things that were kind of buried under the surface to come up more. So you'll have half a day of like, oh, it's so peaceful, I could do this forever. It's so calm here, there's so much joy and just spontaneous happiness. And then like something happens and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I'm like dealing with all this embarrassment. I'm remembering these awful things that I did, or I'm like so irritated at something that's happening, or I'm like, wow, I'm really seeing my self-doubt or my self-loathing, or, painful things come up. And there's this opportunity to see like, this is part of practice too. Both like, how can I be okay right now? You can resource yourself with a cup of tea or go for a walk or something, but you can't resource yourself with like Twitter or Netflix, So ultimately you have to find a way to be okay with what you're going through. Again, there's people to support you if things get really tough. But it kind of, I think expanded my capacity for, I have a little more ability to notice, like earlier today, wow, I'm really stressed. I'm giving a talk tonight. Woo, okay, this is what it's like right now. This is what it's like right now. This is what it's like right now. It's like this. Breathing, feeling, tightness, racing thoughts, just getting in contact with what's happening. And also developing the skill of that letting go we talked about earlier. Over time, seeing this suffering is happening because I'm identifying with something that I'm making it my problem instead of just something that's happening. And so slowly, little by little, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, half step back, 3 steps forward, it's not linear progress. Cultivating the skill of letting go, disidentifying, not taking what's happening personally, making more space around it. And then I think the last thing I'll share for a few minutes is the last few days were really beautiful. A lot of retreats are 5 or 7 or 10 days, and you start talking again, maybe the last day or the last half a day, so you kind of start integrating. And that's always a really beautiful time, and it's like, oh my God, these people are so cool, and we're all in like a great headspace, and then you leave, and it's hard to kind of keep those connections alive. But since this retreat was so long, we had like a day and a half or so at the beginning to talk and get to know some folks, go in and out of silence a few times, and about 2.5 days at the end. So it was really beautiful these people, they really support you, even though you're not talking to them. You're seeing them, you're eating with them, they're sitting right next to you. You know what you're going through. they're going through something like that, and here they are. So they've heard all the same Dharma talks you've heard, so they're really supporting you. So it's really beautiful to get to talk to them. Made some great friends I'm keeping in touch with still. And just seeing it was such a reward. I mean, the retreat was hard. It was great, but there was a part of me that was like, what was that? Why did we do that? It was hard. And so to have 2.5 days of joy. Like there was a fire alarm the morning we started talking again. We were outside, it was freezing. My mood was so elated. It was like joy at every sense door. Freezing cold felt great, felt so pleasant. The blaring fire alarm was like a beautiful sound. It just colored everything. So a couple other,
Psychedelics.
we can talk more about that. I mean, no psychedelic medicines on retreat, but there is quite a fascinating interplay relationship. So, yeah, just a few other quick things to bring up about lessons learned in those last couple of days. One of them was this quality I discussed at the beginning of the unification of mind, stability, contented to be here in the present. The Pali word for that is samadhi. Sometimes it's translated as concentration. That word in English sometimes kind of implies kind of forcing the mind to stay here, but it's much more easeful. It's more like welcoming the mind to stay in the present. And it gets really deep on retreat, even on a 3 or 4 day retreat. But I have been living in it for 80 days, So you kind of start to feel, or I kind of started to feel am I even deep? I can't even tell, it just feels normal, But then when I started talking to people and getting all this, there's a social element now, and the schedule is different, I'm going to leave in a few days, and what's going to happen next? The mind really starts to speed up. And I started to see the samadhi start to break apart, the unification of mind. So it really showed me I was deeper than I realized. And there's almost a sense of I'm having less contact with the truth of my experience now, because all these concepts and future thinking and planning is clouding on this micro kind of scale. Okay, then the last one, I promise, I may be being a little greedy with my sharing now, but it was a really big insight for me that I've thought about in the time since. One thing I didn't mention is one psychological model in Buddhism is that the mind is kind of naturally awake. That's sort of its natural state, but it's clouded by kilesas, which means defilements. It's a little negative as a term, but things that get in the way of us seeing this natural truth. And those are greed, grasping. I need this to happen. I won't be okay unless I get this, unless this is close to me, unless I have more of this. Hatred or aversion. I won't be okay unless this is away from me. Can't have this be here. Or delusion, just confusion about the nature of self, impermanence, not seeing the other defilements. So these are called unwholesome in the simple sense that they lead to suffering. It's not like a moralistic, because I said so kind of thing. It's more just practical. The assertion from the teaching is suffering has at its roots one of these 3 factors of mind. And they're even present in thoughts. And so over time, over the retreat, became very attuned to noticing their presence. And then when I started speaking to people again, I had a really clear, granular, subtle awareness of when these very subtle, I've agreed to keep talking to this person, or I have a little self-consciousness about the situation right now, which is a very subtle form of aversion. And I could see how that was influencing very subtle things about my speech, my body language, and how those were it's like not quite as, like nothing heinous, you know, but like not quite as skillful, not quite as wholesome. And that was really cool to me because it highlighted that this is a skill, like acting out of non-greed, generosity, non-hatred, goodwill, non-delusion, clarity, clear understanding is a skill that can be practiced. So that's very exciting to me. One teacher I'm reading recently called morality or sila or ethics, both the foundation of the path and it's the first and last training. Forms the foundation for being able to practice and meditate, and having established good enough action to be able to meditate, having come to right view and right understanding, one is able to act free of these unwholesome states. But there's no final best action. It's always a continuing process. I would love to have silence for like a minute. Then we can do some Q&A. Great, thanks everyone. I noticed my nervous system getting very active in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I really appreciate your attention and attentiveness. You're gonna be the first question.
It's a really silly question.
Okay, go ahead.
I was concerned about you not using your voice because you have such a beautiful voice. And I wondered after 3 months whether it did affect your vocal cords or it didn't.
No, not at all. I did. I mean, I did speak a little bit every few days, and a few times, like if I was on a walk, there was one trail that I was pretty sure no one else was around. Do a little singing on my walk. That's what kept it alive. I think it's just. I remember having that same curiosity before my first retreat, and then no, it's fine. It happens. Yeah.
So from online, was there a gymnasium or? I think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Get away from the camera.
Yeah.
So you could work out.
Yeah, yeah, there was a little room that it's like a yoga room. There were all people doing yoga in there, and there were some free weights and other equipment like that. And I was on a bit of a weightlifting kick before I went on retreat. I'm not currently on that kick, but maybe I'll get back to it. And I did every few days do a little workout in there. It was really nice.
Great, thanks. And we'll probably go back and forth. If there's any questions in the chat, we'll come back to the room so we can try and
Please repeat the questions.
repeat the questions. Yes, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
My comment is that you are very good at this. I mean, this is just like everything was so well explained, and I love this space between, you know, your thoughts. And I just if you were ever nervous, you shouldn't be, because you're really a natural, and it's beautiful. Yeah, I'm a yogi. I love yoga, and I did a little bit of the training for 12 weeks, but I didn't do I did the some of the Buddhist part. I didn't do the yoga training, you know, to be a yoga instructor. But I just love how well you explain the whole thing about the greed, the aversion, the delusion, and how to, well, those three things, right? Just
Yeah,
greed,
aversion and hatred are the same.
yeah, same thing, yeah. And how you discovered that you did some training to be able to work with those things. And the little meditating I do is really what helps me with that. Now you've inspired me more.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just to say, if you're joining us online, you want to put something in the chat, we'll respond to it. Or if it's too long to put in the chat, or you don't know how to figure out the chat, you can unmute, but we'll go with else.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, Daniel, like in terms of your transition back out of retreat, because I imagine that's like very overstimulating. You go from having like no technology to, I'm sure, like a lot of responsibilities, a lot to think about. So I'm curious, like what that was like for you, and also how have you maybe like do you devote a certain amount of time, or like what is your practice like since? Has it changed at all?
Yeah. Is that loud enough?
You can hear me?
Okay. Question was about transitioning out of retreat and what my practice is like now. Yeah, I mean, it was, as I mentioned, it was so nice to have a couple of days to start transitioning in the same place with the same people, with the same food. You know, if I had to drive a car the first day we started talking, that probably wouldn't have gone well, you know. So that was really helpful. It was the kind of thing where, like, I mean, I stayed up till 4 a.m. talking with people one time because it was like so joyous and exciting. It's such a rare time. And that was greed, you know, there was a kind of greed in there as well. But I would be talking to people like, this is great, I could do this all day, this is so fun, everything is so great. Then I would go back to my room for 5 minutes and like lay down in bed and like, what's going on in the body? You know? Very overstimulated, you know. But it wasn't really like, it wasn't as hard as the retreat. Like, it wasn't difficult that much. Coming back out, it was mostly just nice to talk to friends and connect with my family. There was a bit of a like rebound for sense pleasures, like, oh my God, I can watch YouTube whenever I want. I can catch up on, I don't remember what I caught up on, but like this show, that show, you know. But that energy kind of evened out after a while. These days I'm practicing, I have a bit of an easier time right now trusting my intuition around how much to practice. I've done a lot of goal setting in the past where I'm going to practice an hour every morning, I'm going to practice 2 hours every day. Sometimes trying to practice 2 hours a day, especially, like, ends up turning into a chore, gritting my teeth, getting through it. And then that really dries up the motivation. You feel guilty, you know. So there's kind of a balance between goal setting and staying true to the motivation as it arises. So recently I've been practicing once or twice a day for 30 or 45 minutes a session, or 20 minutes in the afternoon sometimes. I mentioned that episode with death awareness that happened on retreat, and one thing I came away with was there's actually practices specifically around death. It's called Maranasati, or mindfulness of death. Just trying to stay with that understanding for 10 or 20 minutes at a time. So I've been really interested in that practice and exploring it. Yeah, and then there's also, I think the retreat has also helped with the sense of the practice expanding to encompass the whole day more naturally. Just kind of a default state of curiosity about what's happening in the body right now. Am I thinking right now? Am I aware that I'm thinking right now? That's fine. Thinking is, you know, good, but bringing awareness to it is really helpful. And then just like a minute here or there, like we just did, I was like, wow, I need a minute. You know? More attunement to when that might be really helpful. Yeah.
few questions going in from online. Well, what a comment. I'm surprised that you could not bring a book to read. That would be hard for me. Also, no talking during meals would be. Thanks, Barb. Phil says many Bible scholars believe Jesus traveled to India in his late teens and early 20s and was exposed to these teachings and practices. Any thoughts on that? And then how has this experience helped you with life now and with your music? You kind of spoke to that a little bit, maybe the music part. So any insight onto Jesus and his experience with Buddhist teachings? And
Well, I have no insight on the historical
Okay.
connection he may have had. I'm not that familiar with that scholarship. I'm fascinated though. Spiritist has rehabilitated Jesus for me in a big way, you guys. I mean, you know, it's such a tragedy, as I'm sure everyone is keenly aware, how the symbols of Christianity and the name of Christianity has been used throughout centuries, but just very much here and now. And my only understanding of Christianity for a long time was dogmatic. This is how it is. Just accept it. This is what. Just believe. You know. But I often, you know, even in some of the lyrics that I sing, you know, it's like I have to. The metaphor might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm a trained music student, and you know. Those of us in the arts are very good at like stretching metaphors. Like, oh, this is really a symbol of that. And if you think about it, you know, that ties into. And so a lot of this translation happens in my head during Mass. I'm kind of hearing things and I'm hearing them in their Buddhist terminology and their connection. And like, oh, this is about impermanence. Oh, this is about not self. This is about faith in the sense of willingness to do something, willingness to try something. So in the sheet, I mentioned Chris, the handout. If there's not enough, let me know. I have one more, I can make copies. But I mentioned Chris Phillips, who is starting a meditation program here this Friday on Zoom at 10 a.m. in the mornings. And he is a great person. I mean, I'd love to talk to anyone about Christianity and Buddhism, but I don't know a huge amount about Christianity. But Chris has been a deep practitioner in both traditions for many years and is a really good person to bring those conversations to as well.
so have you ever considered having a meditation retreat at Spiritus Christi? So that's an invitation, but also mentioning Chris Phillips. For those who were here last week, you may have seen Chris around. Chris was at the program with us, and Chris has been doing regular offerings related to meditation. But Chris is steeped in both traditions. And so again, I would encourage you, if I know daytimes are not possible for everyone, but check that out, register by Zoom, see if you can be part of that.
Any way to record that?
I'm sorry?
Is there any way to record it for those that need?
Let me reach out to Chris and see if he's able to do that, yeah. And then let's see, maybe to respond to how's this experience helped with your either life or music? And then Joanne says, thank you for sharing your experiences, Daniel. I'm wondering if during your retreat you encountered a sense of familiarity with deep meditation, for example.
Well, from example, from your childhood.
Yeah.
With the Bao Joey.
But if first anything about your music now, how they have influenced your music and life, and then anything from childhood, then we'll come back to anyone in the room.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, stage like anxiety is a great time to practice now. Being worried about someone in the audience is a great time to practice. What's the sound that's happening now? What's the sound? What's the sound? Meditation is a practice in attuning to fine details. And all musicians learn very fine attunement to sound quality, loudness and softness, you know, harshness or smoothness, the timbral quality, the tone color, the very slight gradations in pitch, and the time element. So there's a sense in which being practiced and staying close to the moment helps you be close to the sound that's happening. And, a lot of music is very expressive and is about conveying emotion. And so I think having familiarity with the depths and range of emotion, having greater familiarity, is really helpful in just like seeing what's possible in the music at times. And then what was the next one about not childhood?
Yeah.
Oops, where did it go? Thanks for responding to that in the chat. Yes, I'll be sending something out to everybody, a copy of the handout to everybody. But let's see, a sense of any kind of a sense of familiarity with deep meditation,
Yeah.
for example, in your childhood.
Yeah. Okay, two things are coming to mind. One is a memory. We had like a rope hammock when I was growing up, and I used to love laying in it and reading in it. And I have a memory of like wondering, I wonder if I can stay still right now. It's like, oh, I'm still, doing that. But the other memory though, well, there's a story it brings to mind, which is the Buddha, the story goes, when he went to, he was traveling as a wandering ascetic for 6 years, trying to find the way out of suffering. And at the time, some people were trying these very punishing practices, hardly eating any food, kind of denying the body, trying to free the spirit. And he tried this and he tried this, and it wasn't working. He was like, boy, this doesn't seem to be working. I've really tried. And then a memory comes to him of when he was a boy sitting in the shade of a tree. And he remembers, oh, that was really pleasant. I spontaneously entered a state of deep absorption because it was pleasant. Why am I afraid of pleasantness? I don't need to be afraid of that. So that's part of the genesis of sometimes you hear about the middle way, not indulging and feeding craving, but not starving oneself and just making poor conditions for awakening.
Questions from the room, reflections?
I have two simple questions.
Yeah.
How old were you when you first started meditating?
2021,
Just a few years ago.
but I'm 31 now. Yeah.
Okay, another question. When you were doing the guided meditation, and I know I've done these with other people, and you're trying to focus, how do you pull your mind back in if all of a sudden I'm thinking about what I need to do tomorrow afternoon? How do you pull back in?
So you've noticed already, oh, I'm thinking. So the first thing is to celebrate. That's a moment of mindfulness. It's really easy in that moment to be like, oh, I did it again, or I can't even come back. But the first thing is to notice, like, that is a moment of wakefulness. It's just as valid as a moment that you intended to have on your breath or somewhere else. And for me, part of learning to see that as a good moment was also noticing that I was judging myself for judging myself. Like, oh, I was not on the breath, and I'm supposed to celebrate right now. I'm not celebrating. It's like, oh, the judging.
Perception, judgment.
Oh, yeah. So kindness.
Be kind to myself and
Be kind to
start
yourself.
over.
Yeah. And I think that I'm just using the breath as an example, but there's many fine objects to return to. You can return to hearing, many possibilities. But in that moment, check in with the emotional tone. Can I be kind to myself right now? If I'm not being kind to myself right now, can I notice that hurts? And maybe there's some compassion for what's happening right now.
So
And
I
then-
shouldn't see myself as a failure because I'm thinking about something else.
Yeah. Every time you come back to the present moment, I mean, sometimes exercise is a good metaphor for this. It's like that's like a mind bicep, You can't train this muscle if the weight's up here all the time. Like you have to bring it up. Like that is the practice. Is like, oh yeah, present moment. Boom, 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 boom. Oh yeah, here I am again. And it doesn't matter. I'm wondering because I heard you say, how do I bring the mind back?
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes when the mind is really busy or really active, it seems like, well, how can I bring the mind back? I can't even get it to come back
Mine's
at
all
all.
over the place.
Yeah, 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 all that's good.
You wait till someday.
In some sense, just taking a few minutes to not have external input, even though the mind is like firing, and it might not be noticeable, it's kind of settling a little bit by itself. Even if that is imperceptible. So there's some trust that like, well, it would have been even more scattered if I didn't sit here for 5 minutes and be with myself. But then the other thing is like, just noticing, you don't have to notice the breath for 3 straight minutes for it to count, or for 5 straight seconds for it to count. Just noticing once, oh yeah, I am breathing in right now. For like a third of a second, that's great. And it's okay if the mind keeps getting lost. Sometimes I used to think about like, maybe I can go from 10% of my mind noticing the breath to like 15% of my mind noticing the breath. So yeah, the kindness is really, really big, and not expecting some kind of rock solid, steady awareness. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, thank you. Hope it helped other people too.
I'd like to give you a personal experience. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Years ago, I suffered from panic attacks. There's a lot of reasons for it, but my little darling PD, very often in the middle of the night, she'd have to take me to emergency because I literally thought I was going to lose my mind. So we'd sit in the parking lot, wait till it went away, and then we'd go home. Well, my PCP sent me to, of all places, the U of R pain clinic. You know, now I go in there and here's all these people with horrific burns and, you know, pain like you can't imagine. But the guy I worked with basically worked with me on meditation and actually a little bit of hypnosis as well. And he urged me to get a mantra. And I was reading a book called Dune. I don't know if you're science fiction people, but Frank Herbert wrote a book called Dune. And in the book and the movie, the protagonist gets, there's a line in the movie when he's about to be killed and he just goes, I shall bend like a reed in the wind. And that was probably 30 years ago. And I use that all the time. And as I listen to you talk, I don't know if that really qualifies for meditation, but that's what I use in a real practical way. It calms me, puts me in a place I need to be, and gets me out of the place I don't need to be. And it works. It really does.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
When you do this, is
Yeah.
that like an honor thing? Or
Yeah, it's called Anjali Mudra. Mudra is just a way of holding your hands. And I don't know a lot about the history of it, but it's generally a sign of respect, gratitude, kind of acknowledgement. Yeah, it just feels good.
Notice sometimes you held your hand here too. When you
Yeah.
were speaking.
Yeah, this is great. Do this all the time. I mean, some people don't like it, but it can be really helpful in just like just opening to the sense of feeling and emotions in the heart space. It can be grounding. It can just be helpful to be coming inside. I do this sometimes for doing like loving kindness meditation. Just give myself a hug.
I'll give you a real one when we're done.
To that point, I might just recommend doing this throughout the day.
Yeah.
Most of us live from here up in this culture. You know, we're head heavy. And so it's always, how are you? Well, I think I'm good. Like, really, have you checked in with yourself? And one of the Buddhist authors, Jack Kornfield, who many of you may be familiar with, has a beautiful book called A Path with Heart. But in one of the chapters, he begins with a very famous book, I forget by whom, that it says, Mr. So-and-so lived a short distance from his body.
Yeah.
And I think that describes a lot of us. and sometimes for very good reason. It's a form of dissociation. We may feel overwhelmed. There's just a lot happening that we're not in touch with. So this practice of literally just multiple times a day saying, how am I? Where am I? And I'll just tell one other quick story. A poet named David White talks about he was working in corporate America and had this high stress job working. I think he was, some high level manager. Runs into the boardroom at some point, late for a meeting. He says, "Has anybody seen David?" He means himself. Like he was looking around the room and didn't see himself there. He realized at that moment he was really out of touch. So anyway, just in terms of regular practices, just literally feeling your feet on the floor. So going back to, I think sometimes we can make this incredibly complicated, and not that there aren't layers to it, but sometimes it really is just, as another great Buddhist teacher says, don't just do something, sit there.
Daniel, I noticed when you spoke about the last couple of days of the retreat, when you started talking with everybody again, you noticed that your like the togetherness and the clarity of your mind started breaking down a little bit. I'm wondering, like, to me, it sounded like you were like a little sad about that. Yes, I thought that was very touching that you shared that. And question, would you go on a 3-month retreat again?
I mean, in the abstract, for sure. Yeah. It's I don't know if or when, but there's more to do.
So from the chat, we're so grateful to have you here at Spiritus. Just as Spiritus has been restorative to your view of Jesus, your gifts of music, song, and spirituality have been a gift to us. Thank you for sharing this experience with us and educating and inspiring us. Also, a link to anyone who's interested in hearing Daniel on Evan Dawson. So we'll send out not only the flyer, we'll send out the chat from tonight so that you can get that as well. Thank you. We didn't know we had such celebrity in the room. And after I heard that, I thought how great it would be if you were able to bring Mike to have a session like this. All right. So we intuited where you were going. So also just to say to anyone who's here, anyone who's listening, if you have ideas for, what would you love to see happen here? Just send them our way. Maybe we can make it happen. Maybe it's something we'll consider for the future or somehow see what we can do. So thanks for just even generating ideas.
Do something
Thank you,
really
Daniel, for
special.
sharing your work.
Use that.
So we contracted till 8:30, and we're just about there. From the clock on the wall, you'll see that we're right on time. Yeah, so we'll let Daniel close us out in ways, however he would like to close us out.
Big gratitude. A couple of the things I just wanted to say. One is just another plug for Chris. He's a friend and mentor of mine and very, very beautiful soul, heart. There's been no firm plans, but some discussion that I might offer something in the evenings on a regular basis or for some period of time. So keep your ears out for that if you're interested, and I would be very excited and happy to have that opportunity. And then also I put my email on the handout, and please feel free to get in touch, and I'll be here now as long as folks want to talk, but please feel free to write to me anytime. And if you want a free one-on-one meditation coach, here.
That's good, yes.
If people want to either follow up on Buddhism to learn, I don't put you on the spot on this, or if there are communities in town that you might recommend.
Oh yeah.
That if someone said I wanted to pursue going to a place, any thoughts or where you'd say for people to go, or books, resources to check out?
Yeah, the handout has resources for books, podcasts, websites, things like that. Here in Rochester, Chris and I both sit in a group called Blooming Lilac Sangha, which is based in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, which is a different tradition than I was sitting with at IMS, but very beautiful, very, very rich.
What is it called again, Daniel?
Blooming Lilac Sangha. Sangha is Sangha. Sangha. I can't do it right, but and it means like community, spiritual community. There's another one in town called Dharma Refuge. They do more Tibetan style practice. I think there's one called White Lotus that's also Tibetan group. The Zen Center, of course, yeah.
Just a real quick question. What is the difference between all these practices?
Just a little bit of shit. I'll give you a little answer because I don't.
So Tuesday, yeah, we brought in.
The Buddha described how he saw things, how he saw practice, what constituted practice. And over time, it got fleshed out. People had different philosophical interpretations that led to different views. I didn't mention emptiness at all today, but becomes a huge concept starting in, I don't remember when actually, like, I think the early, maybe 1st or 2nd century AD. So as Buddhism spread from like northeast India into China, into Korea and Japan, and to Tibet, and it went further west too. It encountered new cultures mixed with cultures that were there already. So there's a quip I absolutely love that I saw on Twitter. Someone said, like, it's like the third law of Buddhism is, for every Buddhism, there is an equal and opposite Buddhism somewhere in Asia. So there's quite a huge diversity in philosophical views and practice techniques. And most of the practice I've done is based in the earliest layer of teachings, and that's what's taught at IMS.
Sort of like Christianity.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So huge thank you, everyone. I'm really very grateful of everyone online. It's an incredible privilege and joy. Yeah, next time I'll probably still be really stressed, but I'm hoping that with repeated proof that it goes okay, actually, I'll be less worried. And it's really meaningful to me to practice sharing about this, to share the information itself, and to hope that it is of benefit to you and to those you know, and to all beings everywhere, as we say. And yeah, it's a pleasure. Please feel free to introduce yourself to me if I don't know you, and you'll see me every week.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just gonna ask if you took a chair from outside there, can you go outside there?
Great job.
Stand up, I want my grandma.
Really.
Okay.